Well, hello folks, and welcome to this video, which is all about query binding. Okay, so the name of the game here is we want to be able to create a custom SQL query, and then we want to execute the query safely without any SQL injection attacks happening. Now, I happen to have a module by the name of members here, and I've also got a database table called members. You can have any database table you like. You don't need to copy me, and any module name that you like as well. Doesn't matter. But I have some test data here, and I want to just run you through how ordinary SQL stuff works. Let's say ordinary SQL stuff. There you go. And then I'm going to take you through how to do a custom query. And finally, I'm going to show you how to do query binding. Okay, so as far as the ordinary SQL stuff goes, it's remarkably simple. All you have to do is say something like rows is this model get, and then you can just say JSON rows, and there you go. Okay, pretty simple. If you wanted, you could instead say var dump rows. That's a PHP thing, and that's going to show you the types of each of the different variables and whatnot. Or if you want, you can also echo JSON encode rows. That's another PHP function if you prefer that. But for me, well, I just made my own one and it looks like this, okay? So there's pretty much the most basic example of fetching some rows from a database table that you can get, okay? Now, if you don't add any arguments in here, it will assume that you're ordering by ID. So do you see how it says 1, 2, 3, and so on, 4, 5? You can actually change the order by. So you could order by, let's say, first name. And if we refresh, there's the results ordered by first name. Now, by the way, I'm on debug mode, which is how you can see this. You can also order by something descending, for example, ID DESC. And if we refresh, now we've got the highest ID at the top here. And finally, if you add in a second argument here, you can chuck in a table name for some other table, and it will query another table. Okay, so that's pretty much ordinary stuff, and there's a bunch of other things, get one where and all of that, but they all pretty much follow that type of idea. Okay, so now that we have that out the way, let's talk about custom SQL queries. That's what we're going to do. Okay, custom SQL queries. For example, let's make a custom query up, right? I'm going to say SQL equals, I'll do double quotations. I'm going to say select all from members where, let's say, first name does not equal, I'm going to go into single quotations, and I'm going to say Starsky. Okay, so that's a little query. I'll echo it onto the screen. Okay, there is the query. Alright, it's just an ordinary query. Now, in Trongate, you can run custom queries, something like this. Rows is this, model, and I'm just going to say query, pass in the SQL, and then I'm just going to say object. I'll show you what that means in just a moment, right? Now, if we var dump rows here, save it, refresh, there is the stuff. And in fact, let me just do JSON rows, it looks a bit neater. And there is our data. It's fantasticola, right? So this is a custom query that we have made, and we've now executed this query, and there are the results, okay? Now this thing here, object, we could have said array if we wanted, like that. And when we save and refresh, it looks as if nothing has happened, but let me show you what it does, okay? Now, if we do var dump rows 0, it's going to give us the first row, right? That's just what that's going to do. So if I refresh here, you see how it's an array. So it's given us an array of rows, and each row is an array. So for example, if we said echo rows, let's say 0, and then we're just going to say first name, it's going to say John, okay? However, if we said object here, some people like objects. Well, that's going to give us an error because now it's giving us objects back. And that's what that does, okay? So you can either have your results coming back, like the different rows, they can either be objects or they can be arrays. The choice is yours. Now, as good as this is, the trouble is that that is wide open to what's called SQL injection attacks. An SQL injection attack is when somebody goes to, let's say, a form and they add in some code that could potentially break your database. Like they can actually add SQL queries in here. So where it says what's your first name, they could say Starsky, and then they could say something like colon delete from members or something like that. This would be SQL injection. So we want to protect ourselves from that type of thing. How do we do it? Well, let's just change the headline. I'm going to say query binding. And there we go. So the way that this works is we start off by creating an array. I like to call it parameters, but you can call it anything you want. I'm going to just say params. And I'm going to say first name equals Starsky. There you go, right? So it's just an array. And in fact, we can even say params last name equals star. That is somebody's name. I know it's a bit mad, but that's basically just an array of key value pairs. That's all it is, right? Then what we do is we say SQL equals, and we're going to say select all from members, and I'm going to say where first name. Now, by the way, can I just say, it doesn't matter if you do capital letters here. See where these grey words are? You can do capitals, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change anything. And you can also do new lines if you want. Again, it's not going to change anything, right? But just for the purposes of this one, let's say where first name equals, now I'm going to say colon first underscore name, and then I'm going to say and last name equals, and it's going to be colon last underscore name. All right, so I've made this query here. Let's have a look at it. This one here, and under normal circumstances that would be a strange query. It wouldn't do much at all. But because we've made this params thing up here, we can now do query binding, and here's how it works. We just say rows is this, and I'm going to say model, and I'm going to call upon query bind. Okay, so it's not query, this one is query bind. So all we do is we pass in three things. We pass in the SQL, pass in the params, and then pass in how would you like your data to come back. I'm going to say object. Okay, and now I'm going to just say JSON rows, save it, and there you go. And in fact, maybe if I add does not equal, this will be a wee bit clearer here. So saving it, refresh, and there we are. So you can see the query being generated here. I'm on debug mode, by the way. That's why it's shown me this. And what query binding does is it adds these, or you add these placeholders in. And with query binding, the placeholders get substituted for whatever you had in your array here. That's all there is to it. It's kind of cool. And nobody's going to hack that, by the way. That is rock solid, okay? Now, by the way, This is called named parameters because we are naming them. But there's another way of doing this, which is you can say unnamed parameters. So if we just do a question mark here, you can do question marks, and you can in fact just have an array here of unnamed parameters, and that's going to work as well. Okay, so I'm going to save and refresh, and there's the results coming back. Now my query's a little bit messed up here, but that's just me. I've only just built the framework. But nevertheless, this is called unnamed parameters. And this, like that, is named parameters. And the key thing is just make sure that the number of parameters matches the number of placeholders that you've got here. As long as these things match up, everything is going to be fantastic. And that is query binding.